Hi everybody, my name's Matt Gregoire. If you know me through Twitter or various gaming communities, you probably know me as Matty. I'm formerly of SDGC, but right now I'm running a blog called Questlog, which is a lot of small, personal pieces of games crit, still kind of feeling out the specifics of that project. But lately I have kind of found a niche in talking about places in games and the ways different games facilitate moving through them or existing in them, which is kind of perfect for the game I'm here to talk to you about today, which is Prey from 2017. So Prey is an immersive sim from Arkane Studios, and for those who don't know, immersive sims are a genre that was at its peak in the late 90s and early 2000s because of Looking Glass Studios when they were releasing games like System Shock and Thief. And Arkane is kind of the inheritor of that legacy in a lot of ways. The genre doesn't really have like a clear-cut definition, but it does have a lot of markers and traditions and repeating motifs. Usually they're first-person games and they take place in like very evocative locations, but they ground the player through the use of these interlocking gameplay systems that usually mimic the minutia of the real world and physics interactions and things like that. The prime example is the keypad lock on doors. Almost every immersive sim has keypad locks or key codes or something. And the first code you usually find in these games is 0451. It's a reference to Fahrenheit 451, but usually you get this code, you enter it manually, the door unlocks. But usually there are other ways to unlock those doors or doors like them with similar locks. You can find a computer to hack to bypass the locks. You can find the key that corresponds with the door. You can climb in a window on the other side of the door that's been propped open. This is the simplest example, but it's a pretty good way to understand how immersive sims use these kind of small gameplay systems that stack and weave together to make a believable world that you don't just like move through, but that you exist in and that you learn like the back of your hand. So, Prey. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about the gameplay because I'm talking about the things I love about this game. I do love the gameplay, but Prey shares a lot of commonalities with other games of this genre, and I think the things that make it stand out are narrative and story, and the way it uses those things to reinforce the gameplay. So I'll just cover gameplay up top. It's a first-person game, obviously. There's guns. There's a leveling system that encourages experimentation with different builds. There's gathering and crafting and just a lot of open-ended exploration. It's a very free-form experience, really similar to Arkane's other famous game, Dishonored. In a lot of ways, it feels like the natural continuation of Dishonored, but instead of being segmented into small levels one after the other, it is one big environment that you can kind of explore at your leisure, however you want. But the story. So Prey is a sci-fi story. It takes place on Talos 1, a space station that's basically a tech corporation campus in space. Talos 1 is owned by the TranStar Corporation. It's one of the biggest companies in this alternate timeline that diverged in the 1960s when Kennedy wasn't assassinated and the space race was just a complete blowout. And in this world, TranStar's made a lot of very important technology, such as hyper-efficient recycling machines, fast and incredibly accurate 3D printers, and a thing called Looking Glass, which is basically, it's a screen, but it has 3D depth. So when you play videos, if you look through it, it looks like you're looking through a window into a room where that video is actually happening. And when Prey starts, TranStar is working on a new project called Neuromods, which are basically these cartridges with needles on them. They get injected into the eye, and they almost instantly teach you any skill that has been written onto the neuromod. And they write the skills by scanning someone's brain who has the ability to do that skill. It's things like piano or writing. They take that scan and they map it onto the patient's brain. The only downside or catch is that if the neuromod gets removed, the patient's brain is reset to the point at which the neuromod was installed. Basically just wipes you back to that day. So when the game starts, you're in the shoes of Morgan Yu, who is the vice president and director of research at TranStar, and she's the sister of Alex Yu, the CEO of TranStar and a fellow researcher. So you wake up in Morgan's apartment in San Francisco on March 15th. You take a helicopter to the TranStar offices, and Alex greets you and ushers you in for some tests. And the tests are kind of weird. You're clearly meant to be doing really incredible things, but all you really have the ability to do is like crouch behind a chair, and everyone observing gets very confused. And then during the last test, the guy conducting the test asks for a cup of coffee. The cup of coffee comes, gets put on the table in front of him, and then another cup of coffee comes. But this cup of coffee is a weird black spidery alien that morphs into an identical replica of his coffee cup. So he, of course, goes to drink the coffee, and the alien attacks him, and sleeping gas is administered in the chamber you're in. And then you wake up again in Morgan's apartment on March 15th. Again, which is kind of weird. So I know that was a lot of initial setup, but I think it's essential for understanding what Prey does and how it does it so well. Because this time, Morgan's apartment is different, but in a lot of subtle ways. Well, the first one's not so subtle. There's a dead body in the hallway outside of her apartment. There was a maintenance worker there, and now that maintenance worker is dead. You can pick up their wrench because, of course, it's one of these games. You get a wrench first. And the lights are broken, screens are flickering. It's got kind of a spooky atmosphere now. But there's also little things like there's scuff marks on the floor next to walls, and Morgan's computer has very strange and urgent emails, all caps. Escape, escape, get out of there. So you are kind of just trapped in the apartment. Like, there's no clear way to escape. All you have is this wrench, which, of course, you can hit things with. So after a bit, you realize you can break the windows and escape out into the city. Of course, you just go out in this whole city. You wind up, you hit the glass, and it shatters. And it is not a city on the other side. It's labs and cameras. It's basically a soundstage. It's all fabricated. You were never in that apartment. As you walk around, you realize there's a helicopter landing pad. The helicopter is on hydraulics in the center of a bare room lined with deactivated looking glass. The test chamber is one room over. The scuff marks on the floor, you realize, is you were in the same room multiple times, and every time you got in an elevator or you were out of sight of it, it was physically reconfiguring into a new room. So you got in a helicopter, went to a completely different building, went up an elevator into a different floor of the building, but actually you were in the same room 3 or 4 different times. The walls just shifted. And this is kind of the setup and the perfect encapsulation of what Prey does, which is really interesting, which is it makes you very suspect of everything that's happening. Nothing really feels clear-cut or trustworthy after that moment. So once you're out into Talos 1 and you're armed, you're pretty much free to explore. The station has a lot of different departments and multiple paths between sections, but it rarely feels like a series of video game levels, but instead it feels like office spaces and living quarters and research labs that people actually moved through day to day. And having a space like that feels very natural in a way that helps you internalize the layout of this station, which ends up being really satisfying when you can just navigate department to department. without even looking at signs or a map or anything. And there's a lot of little touches that also add to that sense of place, like every dead body or person that you come across has a name and a job description and a department attached to them. And you can go to security terminals and track every person and find them. So there's actually an achievement in the game for finding every person on TranStar's payroll, which is very interesting. Usually games like this, BioShock, they just kind of litter the place with dead bodies, and some of them might have names, but usually they're just set dressing. And of course, it's a video game. There's emails, there's audio logs. And this is another place where you kind of learn to distrust everything around you, but in a different way. You start to find emails about all sorts of incredibly shady things that TranStar is doing, and your understanding of the rot that is at the core of this company and that led to the Typhon outbreak. It just grows and grows and grows. Alex is part of some really heinous things, but eventually you come to find that so are you. Morgan isn't some hapless victim, regardless of how little you know at the beginning because of what's happened to her with her memory getting wiped over and over again. She was complicit and actively orchestrated a lot of the terrible things that TranStar has done. So you come to distrust not only TranStar, not only Talos 1, not only the mimics that can become any object in the environment, but you also come to distrust yourself in a weird way. Like you don't know what Morgan might have done that you don't know about, and you can only find it out through emails from one department to the other asking, Morgan asked me a weird thing that I'm pretty sure is illegal. I'm not sure. Can you look into this and see if I'm even allowed to do this? Things like that. And you can easily miss things like this by just blowing by terminals and stuff. But the game really rewards digging deeper and deeper into it. And it ultimately becomes a game less about getting through this place, surviving it, and more about peeling back the layers of it and understanding the truth of like what even happened here, what are the circumstances that led to this. And one of my favorite examples of this is the Arboretum, which is a section of the game you come to around the middle. It's a garden area. It's for employees to go and just hang out and feel like they're among trees. There's a nice path, there's benches, there's a big rock wall and a greenhouse, and a waterfall with a pond at the bottom. And for a moment, it feels like you're not on a spaceship. It feels like you are just lost in this park. But if you explore a bit and you climb some of those walls, you'll find that it's another sham. The walls are plaster, they're unfinished, they're rough on the back. There's evidence that some scared employees hid from the Typhon, maybe for days behind them, just camped out with supplies. But the big moment that got me was something that took me hours to notice. I've never seen anybody else mention this before. But I walked up to the pond at the base of the waterfall, and I was looking at the lily pads, and I was curious if I could get in the water, how deep it would be. Because of course, you gotta test those water physics. So as soon as I went to get in, one of the lily pads was a mimic. I took 3 shots at it, missed one, and the one that missed it went right through the pond. And on the other side, there was just metal and darkness. So I kept shooting at the pond, and the water fell a bit more, and it started to fall away, and it was all fake. It was made of looking glass and covering up maintenance shafts and ventilation and other bits of the guts of the station. And there's so many other examples of things like that that I could list here, but I hope that got the point across to you of why I love Prey. It's a game that lies to you, but not in a hostile or deceptive way. It does it in a playful and almost like collaborative way that coaxes you further and further into its world every time you discover something new, and just encourages you to keep digging and pulling back the layers one by one until you understand every little aspect of it. So yeah, Prey is a good video game that I like a lot, and that's why. I hope maybe you'll give it a shot after this. And if you enjoyed that, you can find me on Twitter at Matty_Gregoire. You can find Questlog at medium.com/quest-log or at Questlogging on Twitter. So yeah, again, I hope you enjoyed, and happy gaming.